Well, good morning everyone, and thank you so much for coming. That's extremely good of you. Again, just confirm, my name is Kenneth Bannerman. I'm the head of the Airfields of Britain Conservation Trust, or as we also call ourselves for short, ABCT. And we are essentially the world's first national airfield charity. We formed in 2006 and we're based in Glasgow. So first of all, I'll hand you over to Graham Kendall, who would like to say some words.
Yeah, just only briefly, this is an auspicious moment for the community of Fersfield and also Simpson's Malting. So I'm the plant manager, current plant manager at Simpson's Malting, which is based over in Tivichells. But previously, the ownership of Simpson's purchased the Fersfield site, obviously as a major grain store. Probably didn't realize the historical significance of the Fersfield site. And I've come along about 1.5 years ago and very interested in the history, learned a little bit, learned some more, and it's great to have an opportunity today to be in front of you as local people, some employees here, and sort of share in the celebration of the history of the Fersfield site. I can only benefit because I was the one who started the initiative. Kenneth, with his team, you know, it was their foresight to start this program, but he had, previous to me, had worked with my predecessor, Andrew Holding, to my right, and Andrew sort of passed the reins to me. But I did think it would be appropriate for Andrew to pop by and say a few things, because he knows the background of the site quite well. And obviously we're on an active roadway here, so watch out for that lorry coming along behind you. And as soon as that goes by, we'll get Andrew to say a couple things.
I'm not going to compete with that.
There we go. Yeah, maybe he wants to sit in. But thank you very much for coming. Andrew.
Okay, thank you. So it's quite interesting, in my career, or throughout my life, I'm from Kent originally, so I've always been surrounded by airfields. When I went to university, it was actually in Norwich, and they used to house students on an old airfield at Horsham St Faith, which is sort of now part of the Norwich Airport complex. So even then, sort of being part of Second World War airfields, I then, as part of my career, looked after a malting site up on the east coast of Yorkshire, and Bob knows that one very well. And we had a grain store, which we bought as part of taking over a grain business out at another Second World War airfield at Full Sutton. And then, however many years later, sort of 20 odd years later, I come and work for Simpson's Malt in 2019. And as well as looking after the site at Tivichells, as part of that, you get a grain store, which is based on another Second World War II airfield that I'd never heard of at Fersfield. So it's quite interesting. You start sort of researching some of the history, and at the time our chairman, Simon Simpson, was very interested in history, and as soon as you started talking to Simon about it, suddenly I had a whole load of information that he'd gathered over the years about the history of Fersfield here. And it's got you know, a very interesting history, as I'm sure most people here today are aware of. And I started talking to some of the local guys and trying to think about whether we could put some kind of marker here, because there's nothing really. If you don't know the history, you wouldn't actually know that it was really even here. And then we started talking, and then COVID came along, and all those sort of talks came to a standstill for about 18 months. And then I started talking to Kenneth, and we discussed the opportunity of actually having a marker here. And I know that, you know, there was some other stuff that we were talking about, getting some of the history on another memorial based on the site here. But it's actually great that the conversations over the last couple of years that I started before I retired have come to fruition, and we're stood here today, and we've got the opportunity to actually put a marker for the site here and for all its history. So back over to you. Thank you very much, Kenneth.
Thank you. Well, thank you very much, gentlemen, and again, thank you so much for all your help in recent times. Really, very greatly appreciated. Well, just as we do in our travels, I'll just give you the usual very quick potted history of this airfield and why it also matters on a far, far bigger level. Fersfield was one of the last airfields to open in Britain during World War II. The land was requisitioned in 1942, and until shortly before the airfield opened in the early spring of 1944, it was still officially known as Winfarthing. But as with some other airfields of that particular era, the GPO, among others, came into play and said, would you mind changing the names of certain airfields? And this also applied to, for example, Shepherd's Grove in Suffolk. So a couple of months before Fersfield opened, it became Fersfield instead of Winfarthing. Once it opened started open in early April 1944, there were what were called filler units active at the time, supplying reinforcements for the United States Army Air Forces, the USAF. But then things got really going in July of that year, and this is what is still, to quite a degree, remembered today, what was called Operation Aphrodite. This involved the use of war-weary, mainly Boeing B-17s, flying fortresses, and they were converted into radio-controlled flying bombs. Rather pioneering if one thinks about it, if you come right up today and you see all the various military and civilian uses of drones, as we see in the UK and across the world. We get a lot of inquiries, by the way, at our HQ back home about drones. So there is a sort of relevance between here and what's happening today. So there were a number of missions mounted from here. These aircraft were packed with high explosive. Very pioneering, but also incredibly dangerous. And sadly, there were some people killed here on operations, including, most famously of all, Joseph Kennedy, who was the elder brother of future US President John F. Kennedy. So the aircraft on that occasion took off, him and his pilot, and very tragically, just before they were due to bail out, the aircraft abruptly exploded. Unbelievably dangerous, but the airfield and the unit that was based here, which was incidentally connected with Nettishall airfield not that far away, definitely played a major part, not only in the winning of World War II, but as I've said, thinking ahead, coming right up to the present day. Come the end of 1944, the Americans departed, and this is also where Swanton Morley airfield, one of Norfolk's most famous airfields, where incidentally we unveiled a memorial last year, along with Horsham's and Faith, comes into the story. The Royal Air Force there was switching between RAF groups. So in a way, Fersfield assisted Swanton Morley during this changeover of RAF groups. And this involved number 2 group, which was to do with lighter bombers especially. And therefore from then until after the end of World War II in Europe, Fersfield operated primarily in a supportive come training capacity in helping winning the war in Europe. Although there were operational bombing sorties carried out here from time to time. And notably, in March 1945 when there was the still remembered Operation Carthage, where several Diavolon mosquito squadrons flew secretly over to Denmark at the request of the Danish resistance to bomb the Gestapo headquarters there, which on the whole thankfully proved a success and saved many lives. Once World War II ended, Fersfield continued to be busy, but more with units starting to run down. And then activities really more or less wound up round about the end of 1945, although, as you will see on our memorial, the airfield officially did not close until March 1946. After that, if you look through records, and we carry out enormous research in all angles to do with Britain's airfields past and present, it's still remembered, for example, that in the early 1950s, Fersfield, albeit relatively briefly, was used as a major motor racing circuit. And if you see on our relevant web page for Fersfield and you click on the videos tab, you will see by any standards very rare colour cine footage of motor racing at Fersfield at that time. After that, the airfield gradually was relinquished, let's say, by the government of the day. The way it worked was it was disused, but then the government still owned it until the land was eventually sold off. I was here certainly first in the 1980s, and things inevitably have changed. The runways have narrowed, buildings have disappeared, but not least thanks to the excellent work that Simpson's Malt Limited has done. As you can see, we still got the T2 hangar here. This was one of two that was built during World War II. It's what was called a Classier Bomber Standard airfield, without getting too technical here. So between the hangar and all the other buildings and what's left of the landing area, Fersfield Airfield is still enormously relevant in our everyday lives. But just before we unveil the memorial, as we say, looking at the bigger picture, all of our airfields, past and present, active and disused, have played the most enormous part in helping everyday society in this country. This has been ever since 1909. And as we, again, just simply saying, we've been doing memorials since as far back as 2009. All we just ask people is, within reason, please just do all you reasonably can to help, support and remember Britain's airfields, active and disused, because not only are they the most tremendous forces for good in all sorts of ways, it is perfectly fair to say that in our everyday lives, although we might not recognise this, perfectly understandably, we just can't really afford to lose them. It's almost like a motto in a way for our charity: jobs, facilities and services. And Fersfield, with where we are here and elsewhere around the airfield, this is about a good example as any. So again, as I say, just do all you reasonably can to help our airfields, and of course not forgetting all the incredibly brave and dedicated people who've served here, and in turn not forgetting their families. It's the very, very least they deserve after all the incredible heroics that have carried on, and also the achievement and self-sacrifice and what have you. We must never forget. And therefore, thank you very much. The two gentlemen are very pleased and honoured to be unveiling what is ABCT's latest memorial to yet another of Britain's unquestioned top historical and physical assets, in this case the one and only Fersfield Airfield. Thank you all very much. Thank you.
Here we go.
I'm going to